All right, why don't we get started? We have some attendees joining us. Well, good morning and welcome to the interdisciplinary session of our day 2 of the Lily Conference. My name is Louise Huang. I am part of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences here at Azusa Pacific University, and I'm privileged to serve on the Conference Planning Committee. And this morning, I am glad and delighted to serve as the moderator of this session. And I want to let you know that we are going to show the 2 presentations together, and we're not going to take any breaks in between. So before we do so, I would like to introduce the presenters today and then get into the video before we have our live Q&A session with them. And I would like to introduce our first set of presenters. Professor Marcela Rojas has been teaching Spanish at Azusa Pacific University since 2006. Her interests lie in incorporating service learning, health and food justice, and ethnic studies into her Spanish classes. She strives for each semester to decolonize its curriculum, especially in incorporating different exercises and activities to assess student progress. In each of her classes, she invites her students to decolonize with her, a mutual process that takes time, and is very fitting that one of her students, Abalos, is joining her today. Their title for their presentation today is Testimonios, Social Justice in the Elementary Spanish for Healthcare. So welcome. And the next set of presenters is quite a treat. They actually time travel with the time difference all the way from far away, different continent. We have Juliana, Tirza, Wiputra, Cendana, and also their co-author, Budi, Wibawanta, who may not be able to join us right now, but he is part of this presentation. They are full-time educators from Pelita, Harapan University, Indonesia. They are very concerned about the quality of education and its improvement. They serve about 1,300 student teachers who will be placed around Indonesia, and therefore they are eager to equip these teachers regarding the 4C, teachers' profile, calling, character, competence, and compassion. They truly hope to become salt and light in their nation. And by presenting this paper, these presenters intend to inspire the younger generation to live out the principle and spirit of Pancasila. The title of their presentation today is The Role of Pancasila in Facing Radicalism and Social Exclusivism in the Era of Globalization. Without further ado, let's watch the video and then we'll come back with a live Q&A afterwards.
Hola, les habla la profesora Rojas. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas a Testimonios, un espacio para hablar del español y la justicia social. Estas son las experiencias de algunas estudiantes en la clase elemental de español para la salud médica. Pero primero me gustaría reconocer el territorio tradicional, ancestral y no cedido del pueblo Azusa, un antiguo asentamiento nativo americano tomba gabrieleño de California en el Valle de San Gabriel, y en el que nosotros, la Universidad Azusa Pacific, estamos aprendiendo, trabajando y organizándonos hoy. Creo que es importante reconocer la tierra porque nunca antes escuché los nombres tradicionales de los territorios. Se hablaba de los pueblos indígenas en tiempo pasado y todas las luchas que enfrentaban también estaban en tiempo pasado. Es más fácil negar a los pueblos indígenas sus derechos si historizamos sus luchas y simplemente pretendemos que no existen. Como cristiana y activista, me gustaría aprovechar esta oportunidad para comprometerme con la lucha contra los sistemas de opresión que han desposeído a los pueblos indígenas de sus tierras y negado sus derechos a la autodeterminación, trabajo que es esencial para los derechos humanos en todo el mundo. También quiero reconocer a todos los grupos minoritarios en estas tierras, especialmente los Latinex, Chicanex, Afro-Latinex y el movimiento BLM. En las clases de español elemental, el aprendizaje de la lengua y la cultura van de la mano, con un enfoque en conceptos y prácticas de igualdad y derechos humanos, aplicando teorías de CRT y estudios étnicos, como también modelos sentipensantes. En esta presentación, varios estudiantes darán sus testimonios personales sobre cómo 2 semestres los han preparado para convertirse en activistas por la justicia social en el cuidado de la salud.
Something that this class has really helped me with is I believe that there is this narrative around healthcare and healthcare professionals in general that, you know, we don't do any wrong and we're just perfect, or not we, but, you know, the system that we currently live in my opinion, it's exactly the opposite. There is racism in healthcare that we need to be aware of. And this class has really opened my eyes to this, like things that I was witnessing, but I would just kind of turn a blind eye to because I was too afraid to acknowledge it myself. I was too afraid of it. And so something I've noticed is so many Spanish-speaking patients are neglected due to doctors and nurses simply just refusing to go out of their way, take the extra step to provide just proper care for these individuals. And Professor Rojas has shared countless videos, documentaries with us depicting this very topic of how these individuals are neglected. And I myself have witnessed nurses, again, adopt a very lax attitude toward their patients' well-being when just assigned a Spanish-speaking patient in general. And I kind of connected this to that second aspect of the critical race theory, the dominant ideology, where it says, like, you know, there's this white privilege, white supremacy, very prevalent, and this theory challenges those notions and seeks to stop the silencing, stop the ignoring, and the distortions of people of color.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Rachel. I agree, and I think I've seen a lot of the same things. And I have to say, the term you used, your eyes were opened, I have to say that was also applies to me. Throughout this class, I feel like I've learned a lot having to do with critical race theory, discrimination, and different things like that I haven't really been exposed to very much before. I'm a biochemistry student. I spend time in the molecules, not so much outside of that. And so I really have appreciated how much this course has really given me a new perspective. And one of the things that I think that we've talked about a lot is how this relates to the pandemic and everything that we're seeing right now, and how many disparities are going on with the ethnically and socioeconomically, with the case numbers, hospitality rates, mortality rates, and even the vaccine rollouts. We're seeing discrimination there. And I think that this kind of ties into this first point of how race and racism are central, endemic, permanent, and fundamental part of defining how US society functions. And I think that the pandemic has really elucidated how that is actually going on in our society with these numbers. And nobody seems to be asking like the questions of why are we seeing this? It's like one thing to make assumptions about, maybe someone doesn't want to get a vaccine because they just don't want it, not so much asking, okay, but do they have access to it? Are they educated about what the vaccine does and things like that? So I think that we see a lot of those disparities and how that is part of how the US is functioning. And so I appreciate how this course has brought those things to light for me so that I can be an advocate. Not only am I educated about what these things are, but kind of why they're happening, so then we can go about being advocates for change.
We had this book club this semester about, we all got together and read Fertile Matters by Elena R. Gutierrez. And this book gave insight into not only like the forced sterilization of Latina women that occurred in the past, but it also informed the reader that this is still an issue that's happening today. As a aspiring pediatric nurse, this is something that honestly just disgusts me. Like, I can't even think that people that are entrusted to provide health and, you know, promote health for individuals are educating their patients such that they're being forced into sterilization. And in chapter 5 of this book, Gutierrez discusses this population control activist. His name is Dr. John Tanton, who so heavily argued that by, this is a quote, diligently planning the timing and spacing of births and the size of families, the quote end result would be more desirable, eliminating the possibility of children with unwanted characteristics. And by unwanted characteristics, this activist, this population control activist, Tanton, he just simply meant being Latino. Like that was an unwanted characteristic for him, which is just, it's something that invigorated me. And I think we all kind of came together reading this book, and I just remember every single week we would come to this book club and we'd be so angry and just like, why is this such a hushed thing? Why are we not talking about this? And so in short, this class just really emphasized my role as not only an activist, but an advocate for people of color as a nurse. So that was one of my examples.
Yeah, I have to agree with Rachel here. The book club was very eye-opening and infuriating for sure, learning about, one, why haven't I learned about this before? Like I've been a pre-med student now for a while and I have never learned about, things like this before. And just to think, how many other situations do I not know about that are still going on and still influencing the way that we practice medicine? And so I definitely thought that was a call to action for myself in how don't I know about these things that are going on when I say that I want to protect people's health and that I want to serve others when I'm not serving the whole population. So I have to agree with you there, Rachel, that was definitely eye-opening. I have to say also throughout this class, we've done like a lot of discussion assignments. So like we would watch a documentary or something like that and then write Sente Pesante on it, where we talk about what the documentary talked about, what we feel about it, and also coming from like a educational perspective. And some of them were very long-lasting, influential about on me and have really impacted me as a person. I have to say one of those was we watched a documentary on crack cocaine. And one of the things that stuck out to me was how the legislative branches made crack more of a, like if you had crack on you versus cocaine, and how crack was more often used in low socioeconomic areas and by people of color than cocaine, which was a white party drug, for lack of words, and how the law made it so that people who had crack cocaine were had to go to jail for longer periods of time than people who had powdered cocaine. And that alone was just showing like, wow, like the whole system is rigged against these people. And I just was like really hurt by that. And then still from a healthcare perspective, seeing how like, an opioid crisis is still going on now. We have a crack cocaine crisis. We have, especially with the pandemic, those numbers are going up. And to be treating people differently who are all, dealing with health crises with these things is just, it's wrong, and it is disturbing to think about. So I think that those videos, we watched one on heroin as well, and it was hard to watch. But at the same time, a few days after getting over the pain of watching these things, like a little fire kind of starts inside of you, and realizing, okay, I need to stand up for this. I need to work at this. I'm a healthcare professional. I need to be an advocate for everybody's health. So I have to say that those are going to have a long-lasting impact on me as a healthcare professional for sure.
Yeah, thank you for that. Some examples too from class that I really enjoyed was just kind of encouraging conversation and discussion about these topics, because of course, learning about it, not just from school and like your communities and your fellow peers, of course, we'll learn about all the crack cocaine and learning about these disparities in healthcare system, socioeconomic statuses, and just in any job. But it's also taking that next step of how do you get involved? How do we apply all these things that we've learned, these like little fires that we've lit in ourselves, and how do we go out and make change? Of course, it's applying it to the way that we take care of our patients, the way that we teach other people, how we mentor, how we talk about it. But I think the most important part of the class that I found to be really helpful, again, is just that open environment of asking why and not being afraid or not feeling judged for asking why, and not having really wrong answers, because I feel like nowadays if someone has a different opinion from you, the quickest assumption is to be like, oh, like that's wrong, like how could you think that? But it's also understanding the history behind these different populations.
I'm currently a senior nursing major, and so I've been through a multitude of healthcare situations, and a huge majority of the people in the hospitals that I've been in are actually like Latinx or Chicanx. And so being able to take a Spanish class and learn Spanish and be able to speak, at least even to greet, like when you enter into a room, to make a patient feel much better. I think that this class has helped me in better understanding ways to communicate with patients and apply it to healthcare. And I think through like learning language and through learning the culture, I have a better understanding so that I can enter into rooms and educate and be an advocate in a unique way with the knowledge that I've learned from here.
I completely agree. I think learning Spanish and understanding one's culture is so important, because when you walk into a room and take care of a patient, you're not just caring for their physical needs, you're also caring for their spiritual needs and their mental needs as well. And culture and spirituality go hand in hand. They're equally important to a person. So even if I can just walk into a patient's room and say like, hola, like, ¿cómo está? Like, how are you doing? I've just seen the impact of it. And I think that they really appreciate the fact that even though I may not be fluent in Spanish, I'm still trying to diminish that barrier that so many nurses have created. And we're working towards integrating like a better relationship with our patients.
No, yeah, I 100% agree with both what Marni and Lily have said. I didn't realize that this was as much of an issue as it actually is until I started working at a hospital where almost the entire population of patients that I'm seeing speak Spanish. So it was definitely a bit of a learning curve for me going into an environment where at least 75% of the people I was seeing on the daily basis were speaking Spanish, and watching providers come into the room who did not even try to communicate with these patients in their preferred language, and this look of confusion and fear, because it's scary when you're heading into a medical environment and you don't know what's happening. So learning even just the simplest of phrases, even just a simple phrase is, hi, my name is blank, I'm a blank, hold on while I get an interpreter, just so that people feel heard and people feel understood and people know that you're taking the steps to try and make them more comfortable and try to include them in their care as much as possible.
Haley and I actually last fall were able to create a book club together, and we read this book called Fit to Be Citizens. And an overview of just the general book, it talks about how when typhus fever like struck a Mexican community, health officials and people of power blamed the uncleanliness and all of the conditions on the Mexican community, and specifically in LA. And so living in LA, it's really opened my eyes to how much oppression and injustice that this community has faced. And it really helps me to realize how important it is for them to feel heard and feel seen in their care, because judged by history, it hasn't been on their side. So I can only imagine the fear that they have when they come in to different situations. And it was a really great book club because we were able to discuss with our students, formulate discussion questions about worldly views and just how to combat systemic racism and how we as nursing students can make an impact, and then later on in our professions.
I think that was the most impactful discussion post for during class, because it was something related to nursing, and it was something that I didn't realize was not just the lack of communication and the language barrier that it created, and then the harm to the community. And I think that has continued to impact me as I've had conversations with other friends about it, and just seeing the impact of like the the simple task of just calling an interpreter. And so many hospitals now have it just where you can call them on the phone, but people don't take that opportunity to do so. And so I think it just like stressed the importance of being able to explain something in someone's own language, even especially something like that, because it's not something that even people in English understand always as medical terms. So to have someone be able to explain it in their own mother tongue and in a way that they understand just brings so much more peace to situations.
Acá tenían camas todavía. Mira. Y yo por dentro sí siento mucho tristeza.
Pues
recordar
lo que sientes.
¿Y
por qué sientes tristeza volver?
Pues, ¿sabe?
Mira,
pero tengo tristeza.
Sí.
This baby boy became a citizen 1 minute ago. His mother does not have immigration papers.
We're told they should be sterilized to save taxpayers' welfare.
Something drastic must be done about population growth.
The doctor walked in and said, "We cut your tubes." And I said, "Why?" He goes, "Well, you signed for it." I said, "Me?" I go, "I don't remember nothing." And I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell anybody.
Yeah, I think going off of what Marni was talking about earlier about the No Mas Bebes documentary, this really reminded me of the number 3 of the critical race theory. So this talks about being committed to social justice, and a really big part of that is empowering people of color. And I feel like when they have knowledge, they feel empowered. So when they feel like they know what's going on, they know what they're consenting to, that's being able to have them feel empowered. And that should be a basic right that they have. And so I think going to understanding the sterilization and how a lot of women did not understand what was going on because nothing was translated, ways that we can incorporate this critical race theory is to be able to empower our patients with knowledge of understanding completely what's going on. And if we can't sufficiently explain that in Spanish, then we should get an interpreter or someone who can, because that's their right to be able to know what's going on.
I love what you were saying, Lily, about that. And I believe number 3 also applies to the book club. As healthcare providers, making that commitment is super important. One of my favorite questions we asked during book club was, what is our responsibility as a healthcare provider in making sure that people get their care in the language that they speak? And that's 100% true. It is our responsibility as healthcare providers to make sure that our patients are comfortable and that they understand exactly what's going on. So making that commitment to every day, make sure that we are giving 100% to make sure that we are being inclusive and accepting of everybody in the healthcare setting.
Is like an added level of allowing us to relate to patients as opposed to a translator. Translators are very helpful and I think they're necessary. And then at the same time, if you can speak some Spanish, I think it will really help, your communication and your being a person and being there with the patient, being able to explain things to them is like an added level of understanding in that relationship you have with a patient. And then also, I think it shows kind of a respect and a desire for you to go out of your way to learn part of someone else's culture and be able to learn part of someone else's language. And even though you may not be fluent, I think that it kind of shows that you care and that you're working towards being more accessible and more helpful to everybody. And I think that that's something that's really important, and you can show that when you are working with a patient, even if it's not perfect, and even if you're not doing all the translation, being able to kind of have even a small conversation, I think will be really helpful for me and my patients in the future.
Like in America, we go to other countries, we expect them to know English rather than us learning the language or reaching out to that. And by learning Spanish, especially in America, it's such a useful and inclusive skill because with healthcare, when you are dealing with other human beings, it's that important line of making them feel respected, making them feel heard, and making them feel like this professional has the abilities and was trained correctly to take care of them. And by knowing Spanish, I feel like that respect and that authority is backed up by more inclusive practices. With Spanish too, I also feel by learning how to recommend and how to suggest and asking about a patient's past and being able to communicate that is going towards being anti-racist, anti-discriminatory, rather than being kind of stagnant in like, oh, well, I still talk in Spanish, I still like that, but being active in your approach to combating racism and combating discrimination in the workplace and in everyday life.
Quiero dar gracias a mis estudiantes por participar en esta conversación y por ustedes compartir con nosotros este tiempo de testimonios. Gracias.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We would like to present you the role of Pancasila in facing radicalism and exclusivism by Juliana Tirza, Wiputra Cendana, and Budi Wibawanta. Indonesia can be said to be a multicultural country. Pancasila as the basis of the state provides a means of unifying the diversity of the Indonesian nation through its principles. Nevertheless, there are still several groups of people who have not realized and understood the essence, value, function, and purpose of Pancasila. As a result of this lack of understanding, there are also groups of people who want to change or replace Pancasila as the ideology and foundations of the Indonesian nation. Based on a survey conducted by Nation Counterterrorism Agency (BNPT) in 2020, it found that 85% of the millennial generation is vulnerable to being exposed to radicalism. Islamic Studies and Peace, Lakib, in 2010 until 2011 stated that 52% of students in Indonesia supported religious-based radicalism, 14.2% agreed with acts of terrorism, and 25.8% stated that Pancasila is no longer relevant to be the state ideology. Globalization also provides more space for groups with understandings that are not in accordance with the ideology of the nation, such as radicalism, exclusivism, terrorism, etc. Therefore, Pancasila is often called an open ideology, whose development is also adjusted to the values and norms that apply in society. Pancasila is the goals and the ideals of Indonesian people. However, in essence, the function of Pancasila must remain in accordance with what was designed by the founders of the nation, so that the essence of the function of Pancasila cannot be changed and cannot be changed. So the next slide, focus of writing. The focus of writing in the literacy study is, the first, the role of Pancasila in facing radicalism and social exclusivisms in the era of globalizations. The second, the impact of globalizations on the spread of deviant ideologies such as radicalism and social exclusivism. The third is, how is Pancasila as an ideology to stem radicalism and social exclusivism in the era of globalizations in everyday life. Next slide. Chapter 2, Theory Basis. Radicalism is a doctrine or practice of followers of radicalisms or extreme understanding. According to the Kamus Besar Bahasa Indonesia, Indonesian Dictionary, which is Indonesian language official dictionary, radicalism is an understanding or flow that has a desire for change in a hard or drastic way. Radicalism is in the religious sphere is a religious movement that attempts to drastically overhaul the social and political order with violence. Social exclusivism. According to KBBI, exclusivism is an understanding that has a tendency to separate oneself from society. Exclusivism is the point of view, understanding, or ideology of a group of people that feels more specific, truer, higher than other groups. Globalizations. In positive goal, globalizations is to unite the whole world in a market system that has free movement. However, in reality, there is only dependence between developed and poor countries. When a country has entered the era of globalizations, the people and the leaders of that country will focus on living up to the view of unity and placing themselves in a global context. Next slide. The chapter 3, research methodology. This research uses a case study method with a qualitative approach. A case study is a series of intensive, in-depth, and detailed scientific activities about an event and activity carried out by individuals, groups of people, institutions, and organizations to gain in-depth knowledge of these events and activities. The data collections technique used for this research is literature study. Data obtained from books, journals, articles, newspapers, which contains the concepts under study. For the next slide, my friends Tirza will try to share to you. Thank you.
So the next chapter, Pancasila and radicalism in the era of globalization. First, I already discussed about the background of the emergence of radicalism in Indonesia. The emergence of radicalism movement in Indonesia was seen in the post-New Era order, where politics in the Reformation era appeared to be more loose and open. In this era, religious radicalism movements began to emerge, such as Jamaah Islamiyah, Laskar Jihad, Laskar Jadulo, Front Pembela Islam in Bahasa Indonesia, MMI, HTI, and so on. Ahmad Rizki argued that radicalism movements emerged in Indonesia due to gaps in the social and economic fields. Islamic groups that consider themselves to be disadvantaged in the political field will take action that have a radical and militaristic character. The low economic condition also makes the reason why the weak society become more easily indoctrinated to enter into the radical group. That's why in several cases of terrorism in Indonesia, the perpetrator has a difficult economic background. In terms of sociology of citizenship, radicalism is seen as a result of failure of welfare of citizens, which should be realized by the state as a social service of its citizens. Next slide. The situation of radicalism in Indonesia. Islam radical groups respond to globalization emotionally and reactionally and seem to have collided with the development of social conditions. So that in this era of globalization, religious communities seems to be divided in religious issues and materialism in the world. It is easier to influence university students or even school-age children through the electronic media because they are still in the process of looking for their identity. One of the significant impact of globalization on religious life is that more and more people are showing signs of secularization also. Next slide. The role of Pancasila in facing radicalism and in the age of globalization. Every act of radicalism clearly violates every principles of Pancasila, which is the ideology of this country, Indonesia. The first precept, Ketuhanan Yang Maha Esa, or believe in God, shows that how we as religious people must respect our fellow human beings between religions and respect each of their values and procedures of these religions. The second precept in Pancasila, which is keadilan sosial, or in English that justice, they're talking about justice, reminds us to respect and appreciate humans and their dignity. The third principle of Pancasila is Indonesian unity. It emphasizes that we must put aside the differences that exist in this country, in ethnic, in religion, and race, but prioritize our sense of nationalism as one of Indonesian nation, so that our nation can be united and not experience any split. By understanding this third principle, we can give birth to a sense of tolerance and harmony between religious communities and the state. Next slide. This is some program that conducted by our government to face these issues. These are counter-radicalization program. Some of the strategies implemented were monitoring and counter-propaganda, vigilance, and protection. These strategies are carried out through two media, namely offline and online. offline through seminars, workshops, discussions, lessons, videos, posters, and articles, and online also from cyber patrols. Indonesia also has ITE law, law on information and electronic transactions, to regulate internet users in Indonesia in order to avoid the radicalism transferring. This counter-radicalism program must be initiated by teachers from the lowest level, even in the university, to be flexible. Counter-radicalization is directed through cooperation with religious, educational, community, indigenous, youth, and even influencers to provide national values. And then the second is the de-radicalization program. De-radicalization includes various fields that must work together to overcome radicalism. Namely, the fields are law, psychology, religion, and social culture. In practical, de-radicalizations includes identification, rehabilitation, re-education, resocialization, monitoring, and evaluation. Next slide. Pancasila and social exclusivism in globalization era. In Indonesia, with so much diversity in terms of religion, culture, language, and race, shows how complex in the diversity of Indonesia people is. This makes Indonesian society a multicultural society. This fact is one of the reasons behind the emergence of exclusivism in this country. One of the most prominent examples of exclusivism in this country is exclusivism in the field of religion. Examples, the exclusivism of religious perspective are the first, the emergence of exclusive attitude that is fanatical and discriminatory against other religions, and then regarding the guilt of the individual or some individual of group is the reason for the emergence of hatred and humiliation, for the entire group, and then just want to interact or mingle with individuals with the same religion with them. In terms of culture, we can also see it in the Budi tribe, that's a local tribe in Indonesia. Next slide. The role of Pancasila in facing social exclusivism and also the radicalization in the globalization era. Pancasila is useful for living together in heterogeneity, despite all differences in terms of culture, religion, and race. Pancasila is a reminder for us to instill an attitude of tolerance. And this is the part where Wibawanta Indonesia can work effectively, because Pancasila become one of the most important subjects and mandatory from our government to be applied in every liberal arts education in Indonesia. Especially in our university, Pelita Harapan University. We conduct in Christian perspective, so we hope that we can make our students really aware with situation nowadays and to be open-minded enough to see the diversity in Indonesia, also embrace it is as a beauty and the power that God has given to our country, Indonesia. Next slide. As a conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, from the result and discussion, it can be concluded that the challenges and strengthening of the Pancasila ideology in facing radicalism and social exclusivism in the era of globalization can be done by understanding that Indonesia is a multicultural nation and has Pancasila that must be recognized and fought for together. An understanding and appreciation of the values of Pancasila need to be instilled in oneself from an early age, so that the understanding of Pancasila as an ideology of this nation has been attached to a person. The presence of Pancasila is the basis for uniting the diversity of the Indonesian nation. As a fellow human beings, we must respect the dignity of life, treat each other humanly, and as he treats himself or expects others to treat himself the same. And liberal arts education is the answer to solve this issue. Thank you.
Well, thank you, both set of presenters. You gave us a lot to think about and process and to learn from. And this is the time to do so. So if I may start asking some questions to learn from you further and to discuss. How else would we get folks from across different continents to do that, but to be on Zoom? So let's take advantage of that. I really appreciate both your presentations, how you've come across as such advocates for things that are not yet widely known or widely embraced. And you do it so passionately and faithfully. So would you help us understand in both your cases, so both sets of presenters, these questions are for all of you. Maybe you can take turn to respond to them. What are, as you try to raise awareness, as you try to advocate for the things that you believe are so important, what are some experienced challenges? And then what are some anticipated challenges? Then perhaps we can learn from you as we think about our context and think about the things that we are trying to advocate and raise awareness for. So whoever would like to take the question first, go for it. And then we will make sure all four of you get to share some. Anyone?
Thank you, Louise, and thank you to my colleagues that share a very interesting. I was thinking that we are not very aware of these stories, you know, and that was very interesting, and I really appreciate sharing this with us this morning. About your question, Louise, this morning when I was listening to Professor Jane Lee Huang, I was seeing so many connections with our presentation today. And her presentation, Understanding Histories of Asian American Christianity, she was talking about how it's possible that we have this lack of engagement. No, how is possible that we don't know about these struggles from different minorities? You know, in this case, in United States. No, we were talking about United States, and these struggles are not new. That's the reason we are bringing all this history, and she was talking about that. We need to bring all this history to the classroom so the students are aware of that. And one of the things that she was mentioning is that that would be wonderful if we start this conversation in high school, in elementary school, so by the time they come to college, no, it's gonna be easier, and then we are not gonna see this resistance, because what she was sharing, and I'm repeating myself here, you know, sharing about what she was sharing in her presentation, is because it was so interesting to see that the same struggle that she sees in the classroom, I see it in my classroom, you know, and this resistance about this information, because it's completely new sometimes. Like one of my students were mentioning, you know, like how is that I was not learning about this before, you know? So I think that will be one of the problems we face, you know, that people are not aware of the history, and that's the reason I'm bringing this decolonization of the learning, no, and bringing the history to the classroom, and avoid this color blindness. You know, this idea that we love everybody, as Christians, we love everybody, and we don't see color, and we accept everybody. Well, no. In my classroom, I said, we need to see color. When you see color, then you see history, and then you start really accepting people. And the other thing that I bring to class that is sometimes difficult is that I'm asking my students, don't paternalize and don't criminalize. You know, sometimes when we bring history, and as a Christians, we always paternalize, you know, pour them. Or we start, well, they are living that life because they did something wrong. But it is how to bring a conversation that some people avoid to have. You know, that's mostly what is going to be a problem talking about this. I don't know, my colleagues, so Ashley.
Yes. Juliana and Wiputra, what about in your case where you are? What are some challenges? I know you shared with us already. What are some challenges that you've experienced as you try to engage, raise awareness, and advocate? And what are some anticipated challenges, and maybe maybe a little bit of strategy or idea. How do you hope to overcome them?
Okay, I would like to start, and later on, Tirza will try to add more. So for in our case, actually for having the Pancasila, the 5 principles already being exposed during the study, start from this elementary school until the university level. But we are trying not only touch the head knowledge, but we are trying to have to touch the heart knowledge, as God already touched our heart. And later on, we are trying to use our hand to apply what we are knowing, not only having the head knowledge. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to articulate out about the strategy. Okay, Tirza, please.
The challenge itself, I see the challenge, the major challenge that we face as a Christian university, and we teaching Pancasila as a national ideology in our country, is sometimes the regulation from the government itself. They agree that we are all equal in religion. So for Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, and then Konghucu, and then Hindu, and then Catholic, we are all equal. But sometimes in application, we are as a minority in this country. Sometimes feels like the regulation is not really clear and it's not really consistent to be applied in this country. So that's really a challenge, and how to make our students in the classroom that we teach to be understand about this issue. How can they can feel that they are also in this part of this country, even though they are Christian, even though they are minority, even though they are from Chinese, or even though they are from outside Java. Java is the big tribe in this country, and that's really challenging that we face every day when we teach about Pancasila, and especially about Pancasila to facing the radicalism issue in this country. As you know that a lot of news about it in this country about the problem of radicalism, and we really hope that our ideology, this national ideology, can open their mind about how important to being a brother and sister in this country, to be united in this country in Indonesia, and to put aside about exclusivism, and to see a human as a equal in God's eyes. Yeah, I think that's the challenge and that we face every day.
Thank you. I'm hearing, even though across thousands of miles of distance apart and very different culture, we seem to face similar challenges within humanity, don't we? And it is so meaningful to be able to hear from one another's experiences. Well, if I may call on Ashley, our student here, you're both a presenter and also a beneficiary of Professor Marcela Rojas's class. So I want to hear from you. Now that you've heard all the challenges and some of the difficulties, as I guess a recipient of this what you call process, what can you share with the audience about what might have changed in your mind? Okay, I took some notes about what you all shared, that it is important to start early. So not just in college, but earlier, right? And I think Wiputra and Juliana said even elementary school. Okay, so that's good. That's a good strategy. Transformational learning. I want to hear from you, Ashley. What kind of transformative process that you've experienced, perhaps?
Honestly, talking about or getting the social justice aspect from what I went into, just thinking, oh, we're just going to be learning about Spanish grammar and helpful vocabulary that would aid us in providing better care for Spanish speaking patients. But getting a whole other side of it, of like knowing the history behind Spanish, why we want to provide that inclusive care, because of the kind of mistreatment, mistrust between not just government, but authority figures against minorities. And one transformative kind of learning experience I had when I was younger, and why it made me appreciate having this kind of social commentary in a Spanish grammar class, which you would have never expected, but it is an essential part if you are learning to be, if the overall goal is to be inclusive because you are in that Spanish class. But every time someone asks me about something like that, I recall a time when I was in 8th grade, and it wasn't even within the classroom, it was more so along my peers. And it was during a time of kind of high political strife, and just like with 2020, there was so much political back and forth. And I found that being able to have an open conversation with my peers outside the classroom and advocating for ethnic studies as a requirement in that youth, because I couldn't get that ethnic or inclusive talk or safe open space to discuss these very kind of combative, passionate conversations without feeling judged. And because I was able to get that within my friend group in 8th grade, it helped me along that journey up until college with my Spanish healthcare class with my profesora, make it all the more special. And also just bring to attention why we need ethnic studies to be part of our curriculum from such a small age, because you can only grow from it rather than kind of stagnate or fall backwards from it. Because either way, you're learning and you're gaining new perspectives and, again, furthering that transformation.
Thank you, Ashley. So you all touched upon something that I've been thinking about also, the systemic barriers. You all mentioned different barriers. And sometimes the systemic barriers could be very overwhelming because this is beyond even any group of people, because it's so large. So I want to hear your take on that, as you really would like to see change where you are, right? What are some, maybe even as we refer to the keynote speech this morning, what about the church? How can the church stand in the gap during this time when there's all these systemic barriers? We have a little bit of time left. Maybe what would you like to see and tell our audience as they bring to their spaces, as they reflect upon it? So, anyone?
I think a big part with any, of course, with just the church, but also in any kind of group setting, that showing love for your community, where you live, your church, part of that is also being able to not criticize, but more so have positive criticism in the way where you want it to grow, rather than just hating and paternalizing, like we were saying before in past conversations. And I think just positive changes is being able to acknowledge maybe kind of past discrimination, such as there's a big conversation with female leadership in the church, and acknowledging like maybe that wasn't something that was equal before, but we can take steps and transforming our learning to the future to where it can be more equal. And it's coming from a place of love where we want everyone to be equal and the church to be better, rather than, oh, I'm just so angry that this happened before, and not moving forward from that emotion.
For me in Indonesia, we need to really go back to the gospel mandate for all of the church, and then try to have the discipleship to all of the society around the church, and also articulate out the fruit of spirit and how to give the role model. And even there is kind of the people who burn the church because of that kind of that issue that happened. We are not really trying to hate to all of them who are trying to condemn us, but we are trying to give them hope. We are not, even though in the surprises or press time, we are trying to share love to every one of them. That's from my side. Maybe Tirza wanna add.
For the role of the church to face this gap between radicalism and then what happened in this country, especially in my church, in my local church. They usually make a session for the congregation to teach about knowledge about countries. So the knowledge about unity in as a country. So our preacher in the church always say that Indonesia is a country for all. So Indonesia is not a country for one religion. Indonesia is not a country for one culture, but Indonesia is a country for all. And then we all as a congregation understand that the teaching is really good because that's really according to what Bible said about God love all the people, not only Israel or not only some country or some nation or special nation, but a particular nation, but all the nations in the world. And then our church also has a program to teach the children. So in the Sunday school, all the teachers in the Sunday school teaching them to see how to see this tribe. Yeah, they are different with you, but we appreciate all the different as something that really enrich our community as a family of God. So we are not see our different tribe in Indonesia or as a really different. So we have to hate them and we have to dislike them because they are not matched with us and they have different color with us. Not like that, but the church, especially in the Sunday school, the teachers teach our children to appreciate the differences in this country. I think that's the role of the church that happen in this country nowadays.
Great, thank you. Marcela, any last advice?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Louise. I was just thinking, for me in the United States and the church, I think we need to confront history. And I remember a few months ago when we were talking about this book that you recommend me, 12 Lives, no? 12 Lies, the whole America captive. And it opened your eyes. So we need to confront a history and understand the history of the church, the Protestant, evangelical, whatever you want to call it, in United States. So we can start, confronting that and understanding how this structural that you were talking before, that is also with the church, and then this systemic racism for 400 years. 400 years in United States, and 500 years in Latin America. So we need to confront the history. And if we don't learn the history, we are not going to be set free, as the Bible said. We need to know the truth, and the truth is going to set us free. And we need to bring that to the church and to the classroom.
Well, what a great point to end our session on. Thank you so much, Marcela, Ashley, Wiputra, and Juliana. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your presentation. We hope to continue to learn from one another. And as our presenters remind us today, as we acknowledge the past, even though that could be very heavy and difficult and challenging, we're going to do it in love. We're going to stand together in unity and be able to proceed and move alongside one another together. Thank you again, audience, for joining us. We hope you will continue to follow our schedule with different options for the rest of today. Take care. I'll see you in another session. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.